Welcome back to the Good Medicine Podcast, your weekly podcast where we dive into the important health topics that shape our world. I'm your host, Dr. David Beers, and today we're tackling a really significant development, a new executive order that was signed by President Donald Trump aimed at radically changing how prescription drug prices are set in the United States. His stated goal was to end what the executive order calls global freeloading and ensure that Americans pay the most favored nation lowest price for their medications. The proposal suggests that the U.S. would pay the lowest price for American-made drugs sold to other developed countries. It's a bold move, and today we'll try to unpack what the executive order says, and then with help from some expert analysis that we'll review, explore what some of the likely outcomes might be. So what's at the heart of this executive order? I think we've talked previously in the podcast about the challenge with drug pricing. And the executive order paints a pretty stark picture. It states that the United States, with less than 5% of the world's population, funds around 3/4 of the global pharmaceutical profits. The order claims that this is an egregious imbalance orchestrated by drug manufacturers who deeply discount their products in foreign markets and then subsidize those discounts with the enormously high prices in the United States. The order says that Americans have been unwittingly sponsoring both drug manufacturers and other countries, that these inflated prices in the United States that fuel global innovation while foreign health systems get a free ride. The order asserts that Americans are being forced to pay almost 3 times more for the exact same medications, often made in the exact same factories, and that this abuse of Americans' generosity must end. This resonates with the observation that Americans currently pay about 3 times more for the average price in other developed countries. The core policy set forth is that Americans must therefore have access to what is called most favored nation pricing for prescription drugs and biologics. And if drug manufacturers don't comply, the order warns that the administration will take additional aggressive action. So some of the key actions that are proposed is that the Secretary of Commerce and the United States Trade Representative are directed to ensure that foreign countries aren't suppressing drug prices below their fair market value. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, or HHS, is tasked with facilitating direct-to-consumer purchasing programs for manufacturers who sell to American patients at this most favored nation pricing. HHS is also instructed to communicate the most favored nation price targets to manufacturers, and if significant progress isn't made, to propose a rulemaking plan to actually impose this pricing. The order also mentions considering drug importation, antitrust enforcement against anti-competitive practices, and reviewing drug exports that might fuel price discrimination, and even potentially revoking approvals for drugs deemed unsafe, ineffective, or improperly marketed. It's a multi-pronged approach clearly designed to pressure the pharmaceutical industry and change the international pricing landscape. All right, so what does all this mean? Well, the idea that the U.S. pays more for drugs isn't new. I think everybody knows this. There's been a lot published over the last many years, several years for sure, and a lot of even scientific journals have published articles reviewing the discrepancy in pricing and what the different factors that drive this. There was recently an article published in the Journal of the Academy of Public Health by Richard Bagger and Peter Pitts, and it acknowledges as saying that they state that it is well established that U.S. generally pays significantly more for patented prescription medications than other developed nations. So the big question that I think is on everybody's mind is why? Why have we gotten ourselves into this situation? And what is it that is actually driving this? And I think the main conclusion is that governments in other developed countries use price controls to limit prescription drug pricing, while the U.S. relies upon a competitive free market economy that incentivizes innovation and rewards value. So this is a stark difference between how the U.S. decides, or how it's decided in the United States, of what a drug costs and how it's decided in other countries what a drug costs. Almost every other country in the world, the government sets price controls to say we're not going to pay more than this particular amount for a drug. And there's a lot of schemes around the world. Different countries use different ways to set these prices, but the reality is that the U.S. pricing is very, very different, and it's based off of a hands-off approach from the government that says that the companies and the manufacturers and distributors and pharmacies can charge what the market will bear. So it's interesting that you point out that this competitive system in the United States has actually led to net price decreases for prescription drugs in real dollars in the United States ever since the year 2017. So if you actually look at net price changes, we've actually seen decreases in prices since 2017. So it's I think part of the common thought and wisdom is that pricing is actually going up, when in reality it doesn't seem to be that overall pricing for drugs is dramatically increasing, at least in the last few years. So the question is, what is the right way to do this? And there's a common mechanism that's used by other countries called the international reference pricing, where drug prices are capped based on what a group of other countries pay. And so this system I think a lot of people point to it and say, well, this is fair, because it kind of looks at what everybody else pays and says, this is what the price should be. Now, the problem with this is that the drug companies would argue that this limits the revenue available for research and development, so that if we can't charge more for drugs and recoup the cost plus make profits that we can reinvest into research and development, that there's going to be a real cap on innovation and a cap on new drugs that are made. It also allows more wealthy countries to link their prices to those from less wealthy countries. And that's the very definition of not paying their fair share. So when it's discussed about, what should people pay? Well, I think that should countries that have far less GDP and their economy is far less developed than other countries, should they pay the same amount for drugs? And based off of this idea that you're comparing the pricing between other countries, that can really lead to a real imbalance of what countries pay. So in this article, there was a proposal that of a different standard in not just what other countries pay, but what countries pay should reflect their ability to pay, not their willingness to pay. And so that's a whole different argument, is what are countries willing to pay, and what can they pay? So if you looking at the gross national income, so that's just looking at the per capita income per person, the argument is that is a better reflection of the actual economic capacity of the country, is saying how much per person do people make in a country. So if you look at a country like Ireland or Norway or Switzerland, according to the World Bank data, those countries all have higher gross national index per capita, or income per capita, than the United States. So if you were thinking about what countries can afford to pay, you would think that those countries, Ireland, Switzerland, Norway, should actually pay more. But if you look at a recent study of drug pricing, you can see that those countries pay significantly less than the United States. And so there's an argument to be made to say that there's a current unfairness in the drug pricing. And so I think that's a real thing, that the United States is not the number one country in terms of the per capita income, but they clearly pay the most for drugs. So I guess the question is, how do you fix this without getting overly influenced by government regulation? Because I think what we've learned, and I think what is clear to most people, is that government regulation always has unintended consequences. So you think about the foundation of the United States economy was really based off of Adam Smith's free market, invisible hand type of a concept, that what happens in a completely free market is that the market itself is efficient and will determine the best pricing based off of a free market economy. Now the question is the drug industry or prescription drugs free market? They're clearly not. They're heavily regulated, and the question is, does government intervention improve this, or does it hinder it? So if in a free market for drugs, if companies develop them and once they're found to be safe and effective, they can charge whatever the market could bear for the life of the patent. And when the patent expires, then generics create competition. And that's kind of the argument of the U.S. Approach to drug pricing, is that during during the period of exclusivity, while a patent still exists that protects competition for a particular prescription drug, that during that time, the drug companies can charge whatever the market will bear. And then as soon as the patent expires, then generic competition can come in. And remember from our last discussion about drug pricing and what makes drugs so expensive, the generic drugs are the exact same chemical composition. So they make exactly the same product. So if you buy generic ibuprofen or branded ibuprofen, the active ingredient is exactly the same. It is chemically exactly the same. There might be difference in the coating and fillers on the capsules or tablets, but the actual active ingredient and its strength in the capsules is exactly what it is compared to the branded product. So the question exists is, does this system work? Well, for a lot of drugs, it does work. And as I mentioned, I think in the last podcast that we talked about this, for small molecule drugs, it works very well because the composition of matter patent, which is the patent that claims the actual chemical structure of the drug, that is very easy to argue, to say that is the ultimate protection for the drug. Now, you can imagine that drug companies are not excited about losing exclusivity for their drugs. It's very different than a lot of other industries. I tell people all the time that industries like the soda industry, making Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola doesn't have to disclose the exact formula of their soda, and therefore release an exact copy of Coca-Cola that 100 other companies can make the exact same product. It would be devastating to Coca-Cola to have the exact same product. BioHive is a nonprofit building the future of healthcare innovation right here in Utah. As one of the nation's fastest growing life science industries, they bring together scientists, entrepreneurs, students, and companies to create breakthroughs that save lives and strengthen our economy. Whether you're in a lab or at a startup, BioHive is here to build, brand, and bring together a thriving life science community, and there's a place for you. Learn more, get involved, and see their latest happenings at biohive.com. Now, there obviously are the off-brand colas that are close to Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola has a protected secret recipe that they don't disclose. And the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have a secret recipe. It has a recipe that has to be disclosed. It's part of the approval process for a drug. You have to say exactly what's in the drug. And so unlike a lot of other industries, as soon as the patents expire, you can knock it off exactly what it exists. So drug companies, just like any other company, and certainly drug companies can be considered monopolists. They are. They have a monopoly for a short amount of time. They aim to maximize profits. And that's what monopolists will do. If they can segregate markets, they will price discriminate. They will charge more to those that are willing to pay more. And that's why we see different prices in different countries. When you have a monopoly on things, you can kind of do whatever you want. It's sometimes said that companies need high prices to recoup the development cost, and we've talked a little bit about that the new estimations when you account for all the failures and all the stuff that goes into developing a drug. The pharmaceutical industry quotes a number of around $2.4 to $2.6 billion per new drug. But development costs are sunk costs. So once the product is invented, what matters is the value that it gives to those that need it. So there's no direct relationship between the development costs and the price that is charged. So if you think about it just from an economic perspective, get rid of the sunk costs. That really the value that's provided is what should drive the cost. So even with initial government funding and discovery, companies buy the rights to produce and sell the drug precisely because they can charge a monopoly price. And once the patents expire, generic competition is expected to bring prices down to the marginal cost of production. And that's really what most drugs that we deal with in the United States and around the world. 90% of drugs bought in the United States are generic. And I think people lose sight of that most of the drugs are actually just charging a marginal cost above, a marginal price above the actual cost. With an average price for generic all drug pricing is around $17 a dose. So that's that includes all the branded drugs plus the generic drugs, and clearly the branded drugs is the thing that drives that up. I think most people, when you go and buy or when you go and pick up your prescription for a generic drug, it's literally can be pennies or a few dollars for a generic drug. So an important point is that innovators, including drug developers, capture only a small fraction of the total social value of their creations provide. So that means, that they actually don't get the full value that their drugs provide. When you think about what a drug does, the important drugs that we have change the world, literally change the world. It's not hyperbole to say that new drugs change the world. Look at what insulin has done to change the world for people with type 1 diabetes. They can actually live normal, healthy lives in large part because of the ability to produce and manufacture a consistent supply of insulin. It's changed there are millions of people alive today because of it. And economists estimate that drug companies actually only capture about 2% of the total social value of their created products. So this might suggest that we should increase the rewards for innovation, that they should actually make more money. I'm not sure that there's anybody stepping up to say that that's a good idea, but from a pure economic standpoint, you could argue that drugs like we developed Gilead Pharmaceuticals developed a drug that cured hepatitis C, and you think about what is the value, the social value of a drug like that? It's really hard to put a value on that. The pharmaceuticals industry's rate of return, you could argue, has to be higher than other industries because bringing a drug to market is lengthy. It takes a long time. It's expensive, and it's extremely risky. About 90% of drugs that enter clinical trials don't ever make it to be approved drugs. If returns were similar to other things that we invest in, like government bonds, nobody would invest in government bonds. And so I think I mentioned previously, the only reason that as an entrepreneur, as an inventor in the drug industry, the only reason I'm able to go out and get people to invest in my company is that we can say, hey, if we come up with a cure for Alzheimer's or a cure for cancer, for a period of time, there's really no cap on what we can charge for that. People will pay whatever they can pay and whatever they're willing to pay for those drugs. And there has to be that kind of social contract to say, if people are willing to put the risk and put their money at risk, because as I mentioned, over 90% of those drugs are going to fail, which means there's no recoup on that investment. That 10% or so that actually makes it needs to actually pay for all that failure. You can really understand why drugs cost so much. So the problem is that this leads to the concept of price discrimination. It's really the drug companies driving this, because when you're a monopoly, you can discriminate. You can do whatever you want. You can charge whatever you want for the period of time that you have that period of exclusivity. So why President Trump's proposal implies that forcing a single price would lower drug costs, drug companies might react by raising prices in other countries, keeping the U.S. prices high, or something in between. This can mean that patients globally are priced out of the market. And price discrimination, charging different prices in different countries based on average income, can actually improve social welfare by allowing access for low-income patients who otherwise would be excluded if we had a single higher price that was enforced. This same principle applies within countries. So we today in the United States, not everybody pays the same price for drugs. It's a crazy system that we have. So it's tough. It's not an easy problem to address. Monopoly pricing can leave a lot of needs unmet. If a cancer drug sells for $1,000 a month but only costs $20 to produce, and patients are willing to pay between $20 and $1,000, are excluded. If you just set the price and say it's $1,000, but if people aren't willing to pay that, then you're not going to get access to that drug. So there's a strong argument for government intervention in this case, while to try to level the playing field so that we don't have these huge disparities between the access to life-saving medications. So if we were to do this with just in a draconian way to say, the price of insulin is this much, and if you can't afford it, too bad. What that means is type 1 diabetics that can't afford it will die. And that's the reality of things. So if you had these draconian pricing in place and say this is the price, and we're not going to pay and we're not going to charge any less than this, it will lead to people dying. So it's like I said, this is not an easy question or not an easy problem to address. So economists even suggest that replacing patents with monetary prizes, making drugs available at production costs, is a solution. But I think I'm highly skeptical of government regulation. I don't think it's the most efficient way to deal with any situation. Drug companies do use methods like copay cards to reduce out-of-pocket expenses. They do have programs that they instituted for people that are not able to pay the high price for branded drugs. What if you could get rewarded just for being healthier? Meet Galvin, the company using the latest blockchain technology to reward you for taking care of yourself. They help with your mind, body, and soul like a personalized health assistant to track your progress and help you feel better. Galvin's G Plus app rewards you for exercise and assesses your mental health in under a minute using AI and over 2,500 voice biomarkers. If you're feeling off, G Plus gives you personalized power-ups, science-backed techniques to help you feel better fast. And here's the best part. When you prioritize your wellness, you earn crypto. Ready to level up your health? Use promo code GOODMED20 at checkout for 20% off. Download G Plus today at the Apple app or Google Play Store and start your wellness journey with Galvin. But, the reality is price discrimination is still an issue that we deal with, and it creates incentives to resell drugs across markets, which is why some Americans will travel to Mexico or Canada, just drive across the border to try to find lower prices for drugs. And it's not surprising when U.S. drug companies warn about safety if evidence from those countries don't show widespread issues. Finally, there's an element of hypocrisy in many developed countries. They negotiate the brand drug prices, but are protectionists against their own generic drug producers. So that means that they prevent generic drugs from being imported in their country at low prices. So they artificially keep generic prices higher than they should be, but they force imported drugs from America to be sold at a lower cost. So that contributes to Americans paying higher prices for branded drugs. And interestingly, Americans actually pay the lowest price for generic drugs because we don't limit generic imports. So we import generic drugs from all over the world. So we have this executive order that's just been put out there aiming to bring international pricing to the U.S. through what's called the most favored nation approach. So what this means is our trading partners with the United States, what we would do is look and see what our trading partners, so countries like the United Kingdom, England, Ireland, countries in Europe and Germany and France and Spain and Italy, even countries like India and Australia, we look at them and say, what do they charge? And we're gonna impose price controls that are basically the average of those countries. And the idea is that this will allow the United States to be able to lower their drug pricing and to provide medications at lower cost to Americans. Now, as we mentioned, that this is tough. I mean, this is I think a dangerous mistake that you take two wrongs and try to make a right. I think that's a dangerous formula that imposing price controls and the fact that the U.S. is subsidizing the rest of the world. I think both of those things to me are wrong, and combining those two things together, I don't think makes anything right. So the core problem of this executive order is that we can assume that biopharmaceutical companies can just decide to raise their prices in other countries to match U.S. levels. But there's really no way that this is realistic. Most other countries have price control systems set by the government, and it's a government-run process or formula that's used to provide. And really, it's a take it or leave it price. So they say to the drug manufacturers, this is what we're willing to pay. So when you have most other countries in the world have government subsidized healthcare, and they negotiate directly with the drug manufacturers and say, hey, this is what we're willing to give you, take it or leave it. And the drug manufacturer can't come back and say, oh, by the way, we're going to raise this price by double or triple. The other countries are going to say, well, then you can't sell your drug in our country anymore. So if the innovator walks away, the government might even say, well, guess what? We're going to take your patent in our country. So let's say we do that in Germany. Merck, drug manufacturer, goes to Germany and says, hey, we need to raise the price of one of our drugs in your country. Germany might say, hey, well, we're not going to pay that. And if you do that, we're going to take your patent in Germany and we're going to license it to a generic manufacturer, and you're going to lose your exclusivity in our country. So that obviously would create a whole nother set of issues where, the international patent treaties that we all rely on that give ourselves, that give companies a ability to compete on the international markets. If that suddenly is at risk, that creates a whole huge problem, not just for the pharmaceutical industry, but for every industry in the world. And the tipping point here, this could really happen. And the saber rattling that's going on that we're going to just impose this. I think it's a tough solution, and I'm not sure that the U.S. imposing some draconian price controlling would actually lead to positive things. In fact, I think it would decimate the pharmaceutical industry and certainly would decimate innovation. So that's what we're looking at right now is what happens if this all gets imposed the way that this executive order is suggesting that's going to happen. Now, I don't think that the President of the United States actually has the power to actually do this just by this executive order. This is going to get challenged. It probably already has. If it hasn't, it's going to get challenged in the court system. And so I think there's a lot to be worked out. But the reality is that things are going to change, and how this is going to drive changes, I think it's still unclear. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. So if this executive order significantly reduces revenues for the pharmaceutical industry, how does that change the incentives that people have to develop new drugs? So we need to figure out how do we actually deal with this? How do we incentivize people to come up with new cures or new treatments for things like cancer and Alzheimer's, and even more so for rare diseases? How do we align the economic incentives for the company and for the patients so that we don't result in getting no new innovations and no new drugs? Because that's really what we're facing is if this goes into place the way that it is written right now, I think we'll get fewer, if not maybe no new drugs for some of these indications. So if not this most favored nations approach, what is the alternative to address this problem that Trump has said, a global freeloading problem? So how do we get to the cause of the inequity in prescription drug prices? How do we figure out how to get rid of this discrepancy, and how does the U.S. government approach this? So there's like I said, I don't think that there's any easy answer to this, but I think one of the ways that we have to go about it is calling out the current abuse of other countries in negotiating trade agreements that require developed countries, the United States, to pay more than other developed countries. I think that there's probably a way for us to come up with a way to leverage the U.S. trade policy to require other governments to strengthen their intellectual property protections, so that this threat that they can pull the patents and be able to allow competition from generic manufacturers to come in, that's got to go away. That threat undermines the entire free trade economy for the whole world. We also need to push for trade agreements to address unfair pricing and reimbursement policies with other countries, including the use of international reference pricing that allows wealthy nations to underpay and forcing patients to pay what they can afford to pay. And so using maybe this gross national income per capita as a way to say, hey, Norway and Ireland and Switzerland, which have a higher GNI than the United States, should not be paying less than the United States. And finally, I think the U.S. could advocate for greater transparency and procedural fairness in how governments determine drug pricing. So right now it's kind of a black box in a lot of situations where governments will say, this is the number that we're willing to pay. And there's really not a lot of understanding of how they came to that number. So there should be a balance in global access to life-saving medications with payment levels that equitably sustain investment and incentivize research and development and innovation, and using metrics like GNI per capita as a benchmark could be what constitutes how we determine what everyone's fair share is. So this executive order brings a critical issue to the forefront, which I think is great that we're actually having this discussion. I think it's scary that we're actually talking about some draconian measures that are going to, I think, have a lot of unintended consequences. And we should be thoughtful about how we approach this discrepancy that exists today. My personal belief is that the intended goal should be, how do we make drug prices more affordable for the whole world? How do we make it so that we lower health disparities across the world? I think, and I've said it many times, that one of the great tragedies in our world today, and to be honest, I think one of the drivers of the world conflicts today is inequality in access to healthcare. I think that we could promote a lot of peace in the world through health and through providing better healthcare and better access to medication. So I think that we need to search for policies that don't force other countries to pay more, but instead should incentivize people to pay for innovation that leads to new life-saving treatments, and that we should through trade negotiations and commitments, we should ensure that all the developed nations in the world contribute their fair share based off of what they're able to pay, not what they're willing to pay, but what they're able to pay to help promote new innovation and new life-saving medications. So there's been a lot of people that have been critical that if you limit the upside for the drug company income, you're going to get fewer drugs. And I think that's true. I think that we will get less innovation if we limit the upside. So if we do, and this might be a hard discussion for most people to wrap their heads around, but if we increase drug company products, we'll get more drugs. So the question is, what's the optimal policy? It's a complex debate, and there aren't easy answers, but one that directly impacts the future of medicine and patient health worldwide. So, hopefully this gives you some ideas to think about and to discuss with your friends and family, to think about, how do you feel about this? I'd be interested in seeing feedback from you on what are your thoughts? How do we solve this problem? What is the optimal policy for how drugs are paid for? It's like I said, it's not an easy answer, and it's something that we're excited to have these kinds of discussions on this podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Good Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. David Beers. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you get the podcast. And if you found this discussion valuable, please share it with your friends. We'll be back next time with more insights into the world of health and medicine. Thank you very much for tuning in. That's it for today's episode of Good Medicine. Thanks for joining us as we explore the science and stories behind health, medicine, and innovation. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a great zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please click, follow, and leave a review for the podcast on Apple and Spotify. If you have questions or comments for me, please put them in the comments section on YouTube or reach out on all social media platforms at Good Medicine. Links are in the description. The best way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors of the show. You can do this by looking at the links in the show notes. That's it for today. I'm Dr. David Beers, and we'll see you next time.